Live from the Washington DC area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar.
Mushrooms, colds, immune system, menopause are great areas where plants can really shine and remind us how we're all part of nature. We're going to bring you the best of mushrooms, herbs, and tips tonight to enjoy fall and get ready for winter, feeling your very best naturally. We're also going to show you how plants can be super useful to sail through menopause. Remember, plants and humans are really a match made in heaven. Welcome on Smart Sustainability. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. Fall is here, and with it changes in our body, in the air, and what our bodies need to prepare for and get through the colder seasons. You heard it, you see it, you notice it. An uptick of COVID warnings, new vaccine pushes, and people wearing masks is already on the way. Well, some are trying to recreate a repeat of the saga of 2020, but the majority of people is looking at it much more relaxed and natural this time. And there are many things you actually can do to naturally boost your immune system and get ready for winter. From increasing exercise to a healthy diet, to regularly airing out your home and integrating herbs and mushrooms that can help you with a number of health concerns in a much more targeted way. Mushrooms particularly have enormous health benefits. They really are magic, and not just in a psychedelic sense, but actually also medicinally. Not only are they practically the communication and connection center of the earth, fungi are connected with everything, but they're also the largest living organism, or one of the largest living organisms is a fungus, spreading out over a whopping 3.5 square miles. So while many think the blue whale is the largest life form on the planet, it's actually a fungus in Oregon. The Armillaria osoye, commonly known as honey mushroom. Despite its size, though, it's hard to find because most of its activities are underground. The mycelium, a thriving network of interconnected fibers, constitute the main body of the fungus, and it spends its days chowing down on soil nutrients and decomposing dead materials. Now, this particular fungus is indeed a happy camper. It has existed in the same spot for 10,000 years, making more of itself and obviously living a good life. So a lot to learn from mushrooms in general. Since antiquity, mushrooms have been used for healing, to treat certain diseases, to boost our immune system, and so much more. In ancient Egypt, they were called the food of the gods, the food of immortality given to people by goddess Osiris. And if you don't know the immense impact of the story of Osiris and Isis, I encourage you to read up on it. It actually has a tremendous allegorical meaning for human beings to become immortal, in other words, realizing their full divine potential. But that just as a side note. Because of their unique taste, mushrooms in Egypt were only reserved for royalty. Commoners were not even allowed to touch it. Vedic hymns written in Sanskrit also talk about the food of the gods with a direct link to the Amanita muscaria, in Vedic scriptures named Soma. Our ancestors have used mushrooms as medicine, so not just in a psychedelic sense, but as medicine for thousands of years. Greek physician Hippocrates classified the amadou mushroom, for example, as a potent anti-inflammatory for cauterizing wounds. Reishi mushrooms in Japan, also nicknamed there as the mushroom of immortality, is used to treat many things from flu to cancer. So what actually can mushrooms heal based on our knowledge today? And is there anything really they can't heal? And how can you use them? Joining me today again is naturopathic Dr. Brian Keenan with his superb knowledge on these precious foods literally from heaven. Brian, thanks for coming on once again. There are so many species. What are the ones that you say right out of the bat are kind of like the primary front runner you do want people to know about and use? Let's start, there are 3.8 million species, so we got to work through the most important ones.
So we have some wonderful heavy hitters that, as you said in your introduction, mushrooms have been revered in every society around the globe since antiquity, and they have a lot of medicinal properties and reverence to them. Some of these mushrooms have become culinary, and they're very delicious. And the culinary ones, your portobellos, these ones are going to have some benefits, but I wanted to focus in on some of the mushrooms that are not really as culinarily delicious, but are certainly keeping the tongues wagging in the research world. The first one that I would mention is sort of the main most popular mushroom in research, and that's the Trametes versicolor, or the turkey tail mushroom. And there's a couple other species, but the Trametes species of mushrooms has been studied a lot for hormonal cancers. In particular, it's been studied in breast cancer and prostate cancer. And one of the things that this mushroom does, and it seems to be one of the ways that many of the mushrooms are working as we're trying to understand, because as always, when it comes to herbs, and in this case, mushrooms or fungi, you're not using one chemical, right? It's a constellation of phytochemicals that are found within the plant that do all sorts of things. And it's this harmony, this symphonic effect of so many different signals that we tend to see, or we're starting to hypothesize, is why we're getting the pronounced effects that we do, even if one or two chemicals tends to be the popular one. So in Trametes, or in turkey tail mushrooms, these work very well on hormonal cancers, breast and prostate in particular is what they've been studied for. And what we think they're doing, or one of the ways we've seen them act, is they increase our natural killer cell activity. What are natural killer cells? Natural killer cells are with a very fancy name, feels like a sci-fi name, but these are immune cells that our body makes that are considered non-specific. So they will interact with signals in the body, but unlike our adaptive immune system, that's the T cells that remember specific diseases and are very targeted to those diseases. That's how vaccines work a lot of the time. Natural killer cells survey. They look around for things, and in particular, they look around for cancer cells. They look for cells that are not dividing correctly, and they will, it's called autophagy, like they will actually eat those cells or destroy those cells.
So is it kind of like, hang on a second, so is it kind of like they're basically scanning our own bodies and kind of look for those that are not correctly dividing?
That is one of the things that they do. They also act on cells that have been influenced by viruses. So while we do have an adaptive immune system in T cells for viruses, we also have macrophages and natural killer cells that also can notice through complex signaling that something's off about a cell, whether it's not dividing correctly, whether it has something inside it that it shouldn't. It's a very complex immunological orchestra, but this cell line will notice and will kill off and help clean up the cells we don't need. This is part of normal and healthy cell turnover. What we've noticed with Trametes is that this turkey tail mushroom seems to increase their activity, makes them more active, more alert, and our body makes more of them when it's under the influence of turkey tail. So it's very interesting.
Is there such a thing as making them too active, or is this probably does not occur in nature?
We have not seen that, and the reason for that is that your body is wise, and therefore it's not going to, you can't use an herb, especially in this case Trametes, to push past your body's ability to say, oh, I shouldn't do that, or that's too much. There's so many ways that our body tightly regulates things that's one of the beauties of herbs, is they tend to gently nudge the body and influence the body without overruling it. There are exceptions to that. For instance, the opium poppy that makes all of the opiate medications, you can take too much of that and sort of harm yourself. But that said, most herbs tend to be more working with the body's biology.
Yep. So
So
go ahead.
that's our most popular cancer mushroom.
How do you take that? So when you have that, are we talking about fresh mushrooms, or are these coming more in a dried version, in capsules? How are they the most potent? And how often do we eat them?
So this would not be used culinarily, both from a flavor standpoint, a gustatory standpoint, but also the amount of mushroom you're going to need and the way it gets broken down does require processing. So in the ancient world, they would decoct or boil these mushrooms for hours and hours and hours and add more and more mushrooms and take out the old ones, add more. Because these mushrooms are extremely fibrous, and it's very hard to break them down and get to the chemical constituents that you need. So in the case of turkey tail, and another herb I'm going to talk about in a moment, lion's mane, and you could even say for reishi, you have to really powerfully digest these herbs to get the goods from them. And so what you're going to end up doing is using capsules is the most common way that it's done. And what's in that capsule is a powerfully extracted, usually through pressure cooking and commercial processing, not chemical processing, but just, if you have a pressure cooker at home, imagine one on steroids, because they're trying to make a really potent, broken down extract. So it's not so much about you don't have to worry about nefarious chemicals being used to get at it. It's just that they need a lot of processing. But the capsules that come out are very much ready to be used, and that's what's used in the research, most common.
So is the idea that you keep taking those capsules on a regular basis, or are they these certain types where you use them for a longer period of time or an interval, and then stop using them for a while and then restarting them?
Generally, you are going to use these medicinally in a targeted way. However, if you're anybody who has had to battle cancer and is a survivor, you may find yourself wanting to take them all the time to just gently boost your immune system. But in general, yes, we are looking at what the condition is that we're treating. We're using these, and I do want to also just put a little disclaimer here. These mushroom extracts, especially in their role in cancer, are supplemental, adjunctive. This is not to replace treatment. This is to make all the treatments work better together. Because your chemotherapy and your radiation, these are very important tools. They're strong though. They're hard on the body, and they are meant to kill things, because we need to get rid of every last little cell to make sure that your cancer doesn't grow back. Then we add in turkey tail, and now we're helping the body police itself better with those natural killer cells I mentioned. So we're adding another layer to how the body can just be done with this issue. So they do get used in a targeted way, trying to manage the cancer, and they use traditional screening methods for whichever cancer to decide, whether or not you're in remission or not.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you are able to use them. They're safe to use long term, but it's not necessary. But if you choose to use them for something like boosting your immune system during cold and flu season, then by all means, it's safe to use long-term.
So if you, for example, know, Brian, that you have people in your family that have had or battle certain cancers, and you know that there might be a chance that you're prone to that, for example, would you say, can these capsules also be used just preventatively in a way to boost your general, the activity of those killer cells that we have?
So the answer is yes and no. So yes, you can use them in some aspect of prophylaxis. However, the research doesn't support this. There is no research that really says, because how would a researcher test this in a way that modern science finds acceptable. So it's hard to say from a research science evidence-based standpoint whether or not, oh, if I take mushrooms and I come from a history of cancer, maybe I have the BRCA gene and breast cancers in my family, taking turkey tail is going to prevent it. There's no study that's really going to answer that question. That said, these are good for you. There's no harm in use, and it's okay. The other thing that I caution about, when we want to be mindful, if we have a risk of cancer, it's important to look at our risks. And there's more of a discussion to be had if you are dreading, if you're afraid, if there's this deep need to just monitor for cancer, because, a lot of times our parents, I have a parent who had cancer. It's very personal, and it can be very emotionally jarring, and people can get very stuck on, oh, I'm going to get it too. And while the mushrooms will be helpful, and I'm all for people using them, I also say there's another discussion to be had there about just healthy monitoring. There's nothing to say unless there's something to say. And so I also want to just offer that as its own healing to people who have maybe survived a close family member with cancer and it's affected their psyche and their spirit. Yes, you should monitor. Yes, herbs can be a wonderful way of taking care of your body along with diet and lifestyle. And just caution for those who live in a place from a fear-based standpoint, because that fear is its own stress, which can be its own risk.
Yeah, the saying, what you fear is what you attract. So, for audiences also to know, it's true. It's very true, actually. Most of the things we fear automatically pop up. That's what you get.
And I say this with the utmost respect as a son whose father went through this. I understand that people can feel very emotionally triggered by, what do you mean? Like, don't call it, I'm not scared. You can be scared, and it can be traumatizing, and that's okay. And the support one might need to manage that, to transform it, just like mushrooms transform fallen trees into delicious digested earth that can grow a new generation. In order to transform trauma, that sometimes isn't going to be found in a capsule. So just be very personal and kind with yourself as you navigate if you're a person who sees themselves as high risk. And remember that we have great screening tools in the modern day.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about that one. Let's get to the next one. You mentioned the lion's mane. Is that the second one that's basically on your list?
Lion's mane is having its moment. I'm so excited for lion's mane. She's very popular right now. She has a top 10 hit on the Billboard charts. So lion's mane mushroom, which is Hercium erinaceus. Lion's mane mushrooms have a very unique skill that they have. There's a unique medicine that they offer that we are at the tip of the iceberg, I believe, in what this mushroom can do. So not only does it have polysaccharides that support the immune system and make natural killer cells more active, etc., but there seems to be there's research, and there seems to be this mechanism of nerve healing as many people know, healing nerve damage. Say you have type 2 diabetes and you can't feel temperature with your feet as well. People who have had nerve damage from crush injuries. Lion's mane appears to be, and again, we need more research to really look into this, and preliminary research is very supportive that lion's mane is wonderful at telling the nervous system to regrow and heal itself. Now, for those who've had severe nerve injuries or dead nerves, I don't want to oversell this, and it's very promising.
That sounds
what we're
really
seeing
good.
with brain and nerve health and lion's mane mushroom. So again, just like turkey tail, very safe for consumption. It does not have interactions with pharmaceuticals. You don't really have to worry that it's going to mess anything up. As always, when I come here and I talk to you about any herb of any kind, disclaimer, always talk to your doctor about adding any supplements to your regimen, any herbs to your regimen when you're on pharmaceuticals, so that you and your care team can make a appropriate decision. That said, there is not much evidence that says that lion's mane affects pharmaceuticals. And so for those who have had strokes, those who have had, transient ischemic attacks and they have some brain stuff, even Alzheimer's and dementia. Now, again, those are very difficult diseases, and I'm not offering a silver bullet. Yeah. However, we are seeing support here. We're seeing a wonderful herb, very supportive and very unique in what it can do.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I was going to ask about the Alzheimer and the dementia connection, because that seems to me, if it has such an effect on the nervous system and the brain, that there might be some healing potential there as well.
And the studies are currently ongoing. There's, like I said, there was preliminary research in animals, and now there's some human trials that are coming out, but they're still developing. So we don't have all the information from science just yet, but it's something that's very promising, and it's on the market, and it is safe to consume. So it's one that I did want to offer as a wonderful, again, supportive option for immune support, and also brain nerve support.
Now, Brian, normally give us sort of a time frame as to what would make sense. So roughly, like when you take these, for example, if it works, when would you normally notice that the effect kicks in? Because I know that's very different for different people. I understand that, but sort of usually there is like a little range on when you could expect maybe to start seeing some effects on it. What are those? What timelines are we talking about?
Such an important question. And when I used to teach baby naturopathic doctors who were coming up, and when I was a professor, that was one of the main things I said: how do you know when you're being effective? It's very important, especially in the supplement world, where people can spend all this money and really get lost in all the different supplements. I've had patients come to me with actual garbage bags full of supplements and saying, like, I just take it all and I don't know. And everything's very confusing. So it's a very good question. So how would I know? Now, you are correct in that it's going to depend. Each person is different. What I say with the mushrooms in particular is they do take longer to work, but within 3 months, you should figure out, and again, when it comes to immune function in cancer, that's sort of a very long game. But for simple supporting my nerves, I had a stroke and I have some balance issues, but I'm doing okay, and I'm doing my rehab, and I'm doing all those things. Think of it kind of like fish oil, where fish oil, it really supports our cardiovascular system. It does have some immune support. It's anti-inflammatory, but at the same token, it's no pharmaceutical. It doesn't just cause something to happen. So think of it that way: 3 to 6 months. And you should start, the reason you were taking it should be different. And one of the things I teach my patients, and I will happily give here, is indeed pick something you want to change. In particular, I think of one patient I had that had balance issues. And I said, well, how do you know you have balance issues? How do you know when they're better and worse? Because if you don't sleep, they get worse, etc. Right. How do you know? And again, we have medical ways of determining this through physical exam, but how do you know? Because you're the one who's going to be doing this. And, they have all sorts of things. I can play with my grandson. I can walk through the grocery store without leaning on the cart, whatever it is, and use that as your barometer. But mushrooms, especially with this lion's mane, you're going to want to see some change in 3 to 6 months of regular use. Yeah. And remember, it might be a little change. These mushrooms work gently and slowly over a long period of time. They are not a magic bullet. So, make sure you can notice. And this is why it's so important to work with a care provider. Of course, I have a bias, and I will advocate for naturopathic doctors because we're very keyed into all this information. Yes. But work with any of the care providers, because having an objective person who isn't living it but is watching you, though you walked in here from the car without your walker today. Patients sometimes don't notice. They're like, oh, I haven't used my walker in weeks. Yeah. And you're like, I haven't seen you in 3 months. when did that change? When did that happen? And so sometimes people don't notice the progress they're making, which is why it's so important to work with a care team and to have your family on board. Just because that way there's other people who can say, oh, you may not have noticed, but I did.
And the other thing that you mentioned is do not overload. So you actually can sort of see what's effective and what isn't, right? Because if somebody takes 50 pills, it's hard to distinguish what actually works and what's what.
So common in natural medicine is that, because the other thing you have to contend with is marketing, right? Just from having this conversation, I'm sure when I open my Facebook, I'm going to have mushroom advertisements, walker advertisements, I'm going to have all these advertisements.
Yeah.
And so people, it's very difficult to discern. And so people just kind of add and add and add. And so that's my naturopathic and medical philosophy is I always tell my patients, let's ask the body a question with just this. Or, in some situations, maybe 2 or 3 supplements that work together, like a vitamin D, a mushroom, and fish oil for an inflammation and immune support. Like, where it makes sense that you might have more than one supplement, but still never more than 3. And we're asking a specific question and we want to know a specific outcome. This is the way that natural medicine will really open up for people and help them really learn how to use it, because it can get so confusing when you don't even know why you take the algae and the vitamin C and the this.
Exactly. So for our audiences also, you heard it, never more than 3. I think that's actually a great guideline because I do know, and I'm one of these same people, like I have my mother keep sending me all these supplements and all this stuff, and I have like a whole cabinet, and I'm like, wait a minute here. First of all, I can't take them all. Second, you really need to target a little bit in terms of what you're trying to address.
Yep, let yourself be a little mini scientist and say, I want to know about this issue, so I'm going to use this. And now I have, I'm removing variables. You may have other supplements you use for holistic health. Like, for instance, if you take a probiotic, you may do that. I'm not saying you can't have more than 3 supplements in your life, but when you're using supplements for a specific need,
it's a general guideline.
Define what that need is, and then define what it looks like when it changes for you, what your goal is.
Exactly.
Because sometimes people just say, I feel sad, I feel stressed, I don't have energy. And while those are all valid concerns, that's such an ocean of different reasons that's when I start to see the person add and add and add and add.
Now, Brian, one more question. Is there actually sort of a certain age range as to when you should start, when it's advisable to start consuming mushroom supplements, or when it's too young? Is there such a thing?
Actually, with mushrooms, they're very friendly to our pediatric populations.
Okay.
So in that particular case, when it comes to what we talked about, Trametes, turkey tail, and lion's mane, I hope that a child is healthy and does not need those mushrooms. Like, again, remember, young kiddos don't really need a lot of help. Their body is wise all on its own. That said, let's just say it's cold and flu season and you're taking turkey tail to support yourself and your 13-year-old wants to take it with you. It would be safe. It just usually they don't need it, but I would have to look it up to see if it's been used in pediatric cancer, for instance, turkey tail, but it wouldn't surprise me if it has.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about cold and flu season also in a moment, but I want to finish the mushrooms first. So what we have lion's mane as a second one. What are some other front runners that you think those are really important ones, and what do they target?
So reishi is another common one that you're going to see out in the market, which is really an all-around immune support. But reishi and another herb I'm going to mention, or another mushroom I'm going to mention, chaga, these two have a little bit of a specialty indeed in the building energy and helping with just having cognitive focus and having the energy to get through the day. They're not like ginseng where they'll give you a boost of energy. They're really just deeply tonifying from within. But that's how both of those mushrooms were used traditionally. I mentioned, the long history of use in China of reishi mushroom, and in Japan as well, and in Korea. So that whole part of the world, and they were very much using it as a deep tonic. And they also used mushrooms as a detox. It would leach out, it takes away dampness. And in traditional Chinese medicine, which I am an acupuncturist. I actually have a second doctorate in acupuncture.
Yeah.
And in that world, the dampness means not just feeling edema or feeling puffy, but also dampness can obstruct your mind and give you cloudy thinking and make you not have a lot of energy. So reishi was seen as one of these herbs that gives you energy and removes the thing that keeps you from having it. So very powerful. Chaga is another mushroom that's being used similarly. Now, chaga has a decent enough flavor to it that you're starting to see it be blended as coffee substitutes. And so you're seeing a lot of that. I am concerned about the sustainability of chaga. The other mushrooms I have mentioned are very easy to cultivate.
Yeah.
So we're not too worried about their sustainability. Mushrooms in general are very prolific, but the chaga mushroom takes many years to grow its fruiting body. So you always want to look for sustainably sourced chaga. And most people who are making chaga coffee substitutes or putting chaga into supplements are already aware of that discussion. So but just look for that as a consumer.
Yeah, that's a good advice, because sustainability does matter.
As an herbalist, it's the most important thing we have to think about. It's not just about what plants can do for us, it's what we can do for them.
Yes, exactly. And are there any other mushrooms you want to mention?
Those were the main ones. I sat down and I thought about, I was going back and forth, and I, made sure we weren't going to talk about psychedelic mushrooms because that was a very different conversation. No interest in
actually
that right now.
Also a very interesting conversation for a different reason, but yes. But
and I had said to you earlier, I Dr. Brian Keenan, I have not read the research on psychedelic mushrooms, so I don't feel comfortable opining on their medical value just yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are the main ones I think that I wanted to kind of alert everyone to.
Okay.
Your portobellos, all of your culinary mushrooms that you get very easily at the grocery store. The one thing I want to offer is that they do also have a gentle immune supportive benefit. It's not as much as our mushrooms that got popular for that reason. The other thing I wanted to mention about our culinary mushrooms that we can get anywhere is all those mushrooms are prebiotic. They support your gut flora. The microbiome of the gut is supported by mushrooms because the gut flora, the microbiome of the body, uses those mushrooms as it's their favorite meal. They love it. It helps to build a healthy, diverse flora and keep your gut healthy. So if you're a person who really loves to eat your mushrooms, just know that you're treating your gut, which is really important.
Actually, I want to add one other thing. So when I studied a little bit here and researched a little bit the mushrooms, there's a researcher, Steve Bonville. You may know him, Brian. He published a study in Nature suggesting that a 1 billion year old fossil that they found in the Canada Arctic was that of a microscopic fungus. So really suggesting that actually mushrooms have been around for much longer than what we originally thought. And then he also said that because of the mushroom's unique access to nutrients in minerals and at the same time to create symbiosis with plants, that's why they were a key to evolutionary transition, but that also, I think, would explain why they contain such potent healing powers.
Absolutely. And the other thing that mushrooms teach us, right, the fungal kingdom teaches us, is how deeply connected everything is. Again, one of the largest living organisms is a mushroom network that it spans, hundreds and hundreds of miles, and it's all linked. And not to mention, we know that it's a fungal plant relationship that helps to fix nitrogen into the soil, that helps the whole world go round. So mushrooms are really part of the network that connects all of us. We just are, a lot of people look at that film Avatar, where they have all, the plants all have these like magical electrical connections, and plants connect to each other. But actually, it's really fungus that's doing that connection.
Exactly, it's the fungus that's doing that connection. Yeah. That's awesome. Now let's move on a little bit. We talked a little bit about also the mushrooms and then how it can actually help in flu and cold season. So we're coming up into fall. and then possibly, going into winter. We know there's a little bit of uptick of colds and bronchitis and COVID and other things. So let's talk about how can we prepare best in terms of plants? Maybe also we heard a little bit about mushrooms also, to prepare for the season, to really boost our immune system, so to speak, and really ramp them up.
Yeah, absolutely. So always, as a naturopathic doctor, I would be amiss to not begin with the foundations of health. We need to be sleeping. We need to be meditating. We need to be relaxing. We need to be stretching. We need to be exercising. We need to do all the right things that your body needs, because all of that is the foundation. Drinking enough water. All of this is important to keeping your immune system functioning. Now, outside of that, what's the next step? The next step, I love to say, is food is medicine. Remember, it is soup season. I know, if you're in the on the East Coast, we are in a heat wave. It does not feel like fall, but as the temperatures cool and it becomes soup season, what do all those soups contain? Ginger, garlic, thyme, rosemary, all these amazing herbs that we use to season our foods are also powerful immune supportive, herbs in their own right. And rather, yes, you can go out to super supplements or go out to the grocery store and find a bunch of these in some capsule form. But I always recommend just enhancing your diet with whole foods and all of these wonderful spices, cloves, cinnamon, all these things we associate with winter and fall. Yes, it's because they taste good, but there was another reason we were using them back in the old day, and that was because we knew onions, garlic, all of it supports the immune system, and they're directly antimicrobial. They do kill off viruses and bacteria in the food. So really leaning deeply into these wonderful fall and winter spices and foods is one of the first things you can do. Also, fruits are very antioxidant, and anytime you see beautiful colored fruits and vegetables and you're eating a rainbow, you're getting a whole load of antioxidants. And antioxidants lower inflammation in general. So they just keep things healthy and balanced. They also have fiber, so they promote healthy elimination. So food is medicine is step 2, right? Like, first, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Step 2, what goes in is what becomes you. So eating the good stuff is good. And then, yes, we have some wonderful herbs that really are used more medicinally and more targetedly, such as very popular is echinacea. Echinacea has lots of great research on it. Basically, the way we use echinacea is from the first sign. Most people, including every patient I've ever had, can walk in the door from a long day and go, I could just feel something was off. I just knew I was going to get sick. They weren't sick yet, but they kind of feel it. They felt that run down. That's the best time to take both elderberry, another popular one, and echinacea. When you're in the throes of disease, they will be helpful, but sometimes your body is going to clear that disease before the herb can even catch up. So these are, don't be afraid to use them if you have them, but the best way to use them is when you start to feel that rundown, fatigue, but maybe you don't have any major symptoms. Another one is astragalus root. That's sort of one of my just absolute favorite herbs. Great for the respiratory system, just absolutely wonderful herb. And you can find that as tea, in tinctures, which are alcoholic extracts of plants, or in capsule form. Astragalus is around. Licorice root is another really, really good herb for that. You'll often see astragalus and licorice combined together in supplements. That's because they work synergistically.
And that's overall for the respiratory system? So no matter what, it's really overall beneficial for the respiratory system?
Those two in particular, I could make the argument that licorice is good for anything that ails you. There's research on it for everything, but astragalus in particular, immune booster, respiratory. Every herb I have mentioned is also safe for children over the age of, say, 5. So I haven't mentioned any ones that are not safe with kiddos, and you'll see them. You'll see them in kids supplements if you're at a Target, a Walmart, or wherever. You'll see it's the main ingredients because they're safe.
Yeah, that's great. So those are the front runners to prepare. Are there any other things to boost our immune system, particularly as we're going into the flu and cold season?
So the other two that I thought of is quercetin is a really, really wonderful supplement. It's a bioflavonoid and it's antioxidant. It really helps to just keep the immune system bolstered. And then vitamin D and probiotics. So these are, again, probiotics and vitamin D, not going to heal you if you're sick, but these are powerfully nourishing to getting and boosting that immune system before there's an issue. So those would be my two favorite preventatives, is vitamin D and probiotics. Now with vitamin D, you have to be a little careful. You do not need more than, I would say, 1,000 IUs a day. The daily recommended value is actually 400 IUs, which are international units, a day. But anything over 1,000, you should talk to your doctor and check your vitamin D level. If you have low vitamin D, it's safe to take more. But if you have high vitamin D, you get concerned as it can create calcium plaques in the blood if you overdose on vitamin D. But you have to really work at that. But just check with your doctor on your vitamin D level. But anything under 1,000 IUs is usually safe.
Now, there's something interesting I want to ask you about, because when you're in Europe, for example, when we talk about vitamin D, most of the doctors actually tell you first go a little bit more into the sun.
Yeah, absolutely. If you, and that's all why it's important to check with your doctor about what your vitamin D status actually is. Because if you were out this summer and you have your tan lines and you had a wonderful time being at the beach or being at the lake, you may not need what someone who stays inside and always wears SPF sunscreen because they want to take care of their skin and covers up. Those people might have different vitamin D levels. Not to mention there can be genetic explanations for having more or less vitamin D. And the point of vitamin D, it's a fat-soluble vitamin, meaning our body can store it, meaning you can overdo it because your body will store and store and store. So while 1,000 IUs is usually safe for most people, this is why I've added that little caveat. It's not a bad idea to check what your vitamin D level is, because if it's low, that will impact your immune function. But if it's perfectly healthy and robust, you may not need to supplement it.
So if we can store that, Brian, I was sunbathing this summer and actually went swimming and stuff like this. That means I should have a little bit of storage, right?
Should. That is what should happen.
Exactly.
And unless we check your levels, we don't know. But for people who indeed are enjoying the sun, oftentimes they are in a healthy vitamin, especially and if they eat fish has vitamin D in it. There's lots of, vitamin D, then you don't need it.
And now in the second half, we're going to go into an interview about menopause. Have a listen. So let's talk about menopause medicinals, because I know there are a lot of women out there who are all suffering one way or another when they go through this very natural transition. How can we use plants or herbs to help us a little bit in this transition?
Such an important question, and I'm so happy to be here to cover it, just because this is a place where herbal medicine can shine. Sometimes people can come and they want miracles, they want plants to act like pharmaceuticals, and that's not how it all works. But in menopause support, there are so many herbs that can be useful in so many different ways. As you mentioned, it's the first thing to do in menopause care is remember that this is a normal, natural, and healthy part of life that should be honored, not shamed. However, I'm well aware that when you have hot flashes every hour and it's completely distracting, you might not feel that way. But just as a reminder, it is a normal and natural physiological process.
Even though it's really hard for most of us to deal with that, I will say that.
Exactly. I certainly don't want to shortchange or ignore a lot of the frustrations that can come with menopause. And at the same token, as an American Western society, there can be a little demonization of menopause, and I want to also dispel that. But let's talk about the plants. Let's jump into that. So one of the things, chief among them with menopause is that estrogen levels begin to drop, right? The ovaries stop producing as much estrogen, and while you still produce some, and your fat cells produce estrogen, and there's other ways your body makes this hormone, they start to peter off, which is where our good friend phytoestrogens comes in. So phyto meaning plant, estrogen meaning estrogen. The first thing I want to mention about phytoestrogens in general, so we're going to talk about a bunch of plants that do have phytoestrogens. We're going to talk about some plants that don't have phytoestrogens but still have value. But when I'm talking about phytoestrogens, most common one is found in soy. That's a very common one that people know. Phytoestrogens they bind to your estrogen receptors, but they do not create the same strength of signal as the actual hormone your body can make. So this has good implications because it can help modulate the estrogen as it begins to go down. So when estrogen goes down very quickly and then up very quickly because your body is trying to find a new normal, that's when we see a lot of these symptoms: the hot flashes, the dryness, the weight gain, the fogginess. All of these things can happen, and one minute you're fine and the next minute you're not. That's that estrogen flux that can occur. And phytoestrogens step in and they kind of like hold down the fort while your body's coming to a new normal, and they can be very supportive. So some very popular ones, I mentioned soy. So soy isoflavones are kind of the most popular one. There's this huge contingency about worrying about, will soy cause more breast cancer? The evidence is mixed on that. That said, for those who are not at high risk of breast cancer, soy products can be very helpful during menopause to help normalize things, and they're very easy to find, which is why I bring them up. Some other herbs include red clover, which is a very simple herb, but it's a phytoestrogen. It also helps the immune system, which I like. Also, another herb I love is called shatavari. Its Latin name is Asparagus racemosus. It's a wonderful, wonderful herb, made popular and famous and from India. And its name means she who has 1,000 blessings. And another translation that's a little bit more cheeky is she with 1,000 husbands. And the reason for this is because it is wonderful for the libido. It is wonderful for lubrication if vaginal dryness is an issue. And it's very wonderful for energy and cognitive focus. So it is just this wonderful herb that really, I can't say enough about it in terms of just, if there was one herb that just stepped in and kind of did a lot of what you wanted from a menopause herb, if you will, shatavari, very, very useful and very sustainable. So
and best
that is
used
one herb
in capsules?
Yep, it's very commonly used in capsules. And it's not hard to find. So it's very common. Another herb that most people have probably heard of is black cohosh. This one gets trotted out very regularly for menopause as well as for hot flashes. I do mention to people, in about 10% of users, black cohosh will cause what appears to be a migraine headache. This will set in within 3 to 4 hours of using the product. So if you use black cohosh and the next day you have a headache, it's probably not the black cohosh. But if you use black cohosh and you get a frontal headache within a couple hours, please just discontinue use. It's not harming you, but that won't stop happening if you keep using it. For the other 90% of individuals, it is a wonderful herb for supporting both the estrogen levels in females, but also really curtailing those hot flashes if that's a big issue for you. And then another herb is dong quai. Now with dong quai, its other name is Angelica sinensis. It's sometimes just called Angelica. That said, there are several Angelicas, so for herbalists, we can get a little confused, but sometimes on the market, you'll see that, but it's Angelica. The second word you'll see on the label is sinensis. And so that, or dong quai, is its other very common, popular name, which is its Chinese name. This is an herb that very much helps with dryness. It also helps with energy, and it helps with skin, hair, and nails very, very well. The thing is, though, it is associated also with, sometimes it can cause a breakthrough period. So a lot of perimenopausal women oftentimes will say, you have to go a whole year without a period to officially be considered in menopause. And I have had plenty of patients who are at 9, 10 months and they're kind of like, am I done? Is it over? And they take a bunch of Dong Quai and they take a bunch of herbs and they get a period and they start the clock over. There's no way of knowing in that scenario whether it was the plant or the person's physiology. Okay. So I just say use with caution if you're really trying to finish it. It does not tend to cause periods in people who are postmenopausal, have been in menopause for some time. It doesn't tend to cause it in them. But for my perimenopausal ladies out there, if you really don't want another period, just be careful if you're going to use Dong Quai.
Okay. Interesting. Very interesting.
So that's a little bit on the estrogen side.
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to mention was a couple really lovely herbs for the mental side. So another main thing, because we talk about hot flashes, we talk about dryness, and we talk about weight gain, those are all valid. And then the other thing is depression, the blues, and not just because you're getting older and your body is alerting you to that, but there's just a drop in mood in general. And I really can't say enough about wonderful herbs such as passion flower, lemon balm, and St. John's wort is another wonderful herb that can really boost the mood and help kind of stabilize the mood. With St. John's wort, I always have to give the warning that it interacts with a lot of pharmaceuticals, chief among them being any blood thinners and any psychoactive medication. So if you're on an antidepressant, don't add St. John's wort to that. We don't like that. That's not a good idea. It affects how the drug is metabolized.
But so can you combine it with other medicinal things you take? Yes. I mean, herbal stuff.
Yes. So St. John's wort with other mood boosting herbs, botanicals, that will be safe. That will be okay. But just if you're on pharmaceuticals, please talk to your doctor about adding St. John's wort or really any of these herbs. It's always good to talk with your doctor about whenever you add supplements to your regimen. That said, St. John's wort in particular, I just hope the dear viewer, I just hope it like rings a little bell to, I should just check in, especially if I take a pharmaceutical. And then the other thing I always like to offer people is tea. So sage tea, like garden sage, 1/3 of the time, so not always, but 30% of the time, sage tea, drinking a cup of sage and Dhammayana, which is Turnera diffusa, tea at the end of your night really can just kind of help the mood, help hot flashes, promote deeper sleep. It's a very cheap and simple little herbal tea you can make. And while it doesn't always help everyone, I do offer it to all of my patients who are working with menopause, just because when it does work, it works very well.
And you always take this at the end of the day, right?
I recommend to take it at the end of the day. It becomes a nice ritual too, to just sort of bring everything down and have a cup of tea. You can add honey, because sage has a very unique flavor, so you can add other things to it to make it a little more palatable for yourself, and that's okay.
Do you have anything also to offer for weight gain? How do we deal with that?
That one's tricky, just because you're fighting against metabolism.
Yeah.
Always check with your doctor about your thyroid health. It is not required that the thyroid becomes disrupted during menopause. Those two don't go together, even though there's a kind of a common assumption that they do. However, when the thyroid is not functioning correctly, it can be the root cause of so many issues. And I catch it pretty often in my patients. So check on with your thyroid, because that's part of what controls your metabolism. And then we can switch to herbs. Now, there is no weight loss herb. I hate to tell you, if there was an herb that caused weight loss, it would be out there on the market and making millions of dollars. That said, green tea, which you do see supplements often tout green tea, there is evidence that supports green tea does gently boost the metabolism. Our ginsengs do help boost the metabolism, but it's really going to come from diet and exercise, but in particular diet. So you're going to want to work with a nutritionist, work with your doctor, and find a nice healthy diet that helps you to stay slim, because indeed, as your metabolism drops, your nutritional needs change. And so I want to give you a magic bullet, but there is no perfect magic bullet for that. But there are herbs that help.
Yeah, we heard about a range of them actually right now. So that is, I think this is actually a very, very healthy start. Is there anything else, Brian, you want to add to the menopause medicinal approach?
I would remember a couple more things. So you're in menopause. We focus on a lot of things about your day-to-day living, but I also want to put a note in about longevity here. So you're going to want to work on that bone health. Estrogen is part of how females keep their bones healthy and strong. So you're going to want to make sure that you have enough vitamin D, you have a healthy dietary calcium. You don't have to take giant amounts of calcium as a supplement, but you also want to be working, doing some gentle weight-bearing exercises. You don't need to become a bodybuilder, but you do need to be doing weight-bearing exercises, not just aerobics. Yoga is wonderful as it helps with flexibility as well as you use your own body.
And also stabilizes the emotional and the mental part, right?
And exactly. It also links into that mental, emotional, spiritual piece as well. So I can't say enough about the benefits of yoga, but just you might not notice bone health issues when you go through menopause because we don't really feel our bones. But that's one where I just say, think long game. You're going to want to start thinking about just making sure you're taking care of them. Also, fish oil or EPA and DHA are just another supplement that really helps be anti-inflammatory. It helps support just all aspects of cardiovascular and mental health as well. But like I'm saying, this is more of the long game of menopause versus that initial hot flashes, weight gain, foggy brain, skin dryness, no libido. That kind of draws a lot of attention, and I think we've talked about several ways to address those because it's what you're dealing with on the day-to-day. But I just want to remind our viewers, if you're going through menopause, just as a note, start thinking about that the bone health as well as cardiovascular.
Yeah. Any final words, Brian? We're out of time.
Just remember, it's a beautiful, normal, and natural time in your life, and I hope that you have support and you honor yourself as you go through life and go into a new chapter.
Actually, that is a really, really important point, the honoring yourself part also, I think, as women get older particularly. Thank you very much. On that note, we're going to end this segment. Thanks, Brian, so much for joining us. And that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for watching, and we wish you a wonderful week. Have a good night.